Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of Data Unchained. This is a podcast about the new world of decentralized data and remote workforces as companies are distributing all over the globe. I'm Molly Presley, and my first guest is David Flynn, CEO of Hammerspace. Hammerspace is the company producing this podcast, and David's experience here as our first guest talks not just about experiences related to Hammerspace, but more largely as an entrepreneur, an investor, and really an influencer in the technology space. So, David, I'm so happy to have you on the podcast.
Well, thanks, Molly. Glad to be here.
Would you tell us a little bit about your background, and maybe while you're doing that, a little bit about Hammerspace?
Sure. I'm a technologist. I wear the CEO badge, but I started my career as a hobbyist computer programmer and have been an avid developer. But I guess my claim to fame, or what I'm most known for, is the venture Fusion IO that introduced solid state technologies into the enterprise world. That would be my claim to fame.
So, what was your role at Fusion IO?
I founded the company, started as CTO, building the technology, and after going through 3 different CEOs in 3 years, I was convinced to take the role as CEO. Which I really enjoyed. And so, yeah, CTO, then CEO throughout the company.
And as you think about the macro trends going on in the world right now, there's a lot of change going on in the world, between changes related to the cloud, to companies becoming more remote, decentralizing. Kind of what would you say your experience, both as a developer at Fusion, even here at Hammerspace, has really led you to thinking that this is a topic that's really fit for conversation of a podcast like this?
Well, at Fusion IO, something very interesting happened in the industry with solid state. Having such high performance density in Flash versus the low performance of mechanical drives caused a sea change event to shifting from the centralization of the storage array and having many mechanical drives grouped together so that you could better get maximum utilization of the limited resource of those heads on a platter spinning. With Flash, it inverted the whole thing. It was better to distribute the media down inside the servers and to use a scale out architecture. So we were at the forefront of, witnessed and helped induce the decentralization of storage of the media. And that worked very well for the web properties who had already gone to sort of a scale out architecture. But for the rest of enterprise, it created a huge problem because this decentralization of the media, of storage, left behind the data, and it led to data being compartmentalized and siloed. So it wasn't followed by the decentralization of data, but rather the ultra localization of data stuck now down on the small units of media down in every server. So Fusion IO was about that move towards solid state, which led to decentralization of the media. And now Hammerspace is my attempt, and I think well positioned, to make it possible to work with decentralized data that is no longer localized within any specific piece of storage. And it's because Fusion IO drove that to the absurdity down in each server.
So, decentralized data, what does that mean for a business? You're thinking, if you're talking to maybe a CIO who's thinking about their plans for 22, 23, how can decentralized data help their businesses grow?
Well, that's the fascinating thing. I started this with the perspective on decentralizing data within the data center across flash in the servers or across third-party storage systems. But it turns out that same problem at a macro scale between entire data centers taps into a bigger problem that CIOs, CTOs, even the CEOs of companies have, and that's how to get more people uh, accessing data, especially with data being such an important part of the modern world. How do you get your professionals, IT, your knowledge professionals, uh, access to data from far-flung places in the world? And that's kind of where we're seeing drivers today around the distributed workforce and the fact that people want to work from home has changed the game entirely.
So, how do you see when we think about the conversations about global data, decentralized data? How has COVID affected the need for solutions to make this possible?
Well, I think it accelerated a trend that was already underway. In the technology world, we have had, programmers working from uh, around the globe, especially in the Linux and open source community. It's a very distributed community. But COVID accelerated this move towards having people work from home, and not just home a few miles from the office, but home as in a different state or even a different country. And so that's one area where it's changed a lot, is the expectation of being able to work remotely, even with workflows that are extremely data intensive. And that's where it gets actually rather difficult. That's one.
So, hasn't the cloud really solved a lot of these challenges that we hear about cloud regions all over the world and different cloud companies and different, coming out of their roots in the Americas or Asia or wherever it is? What's different about our solution to global data as we think about really what needs to happen in this idea of like a data supply chain?
Well, I think the cloud is a very important part of it in that you have infrastructure resources that are themselves distributed. But the challenge is the data itself. It's very easy to find server resources anywhere. It's easy to spin up storage systems anywhere. It's difficult to have your data where you need to use it. So again, it's that same thing that we saw with Fusion IO. Fusion IO is at a micro scale of distributing data in and among the servers by having very high performance density flash. And here we're talking about having whole data centers now that are distributed around the globe, ready and willing to take workload. But how do you have your data there? And it's not just about a given cloud provider. It's that they have different regions, they have different data centers, and you have to choose which one, and then your data is again localized. Um, so I like the statement. It's easy to spin up infrastructure, a storage system anywhere in the world. It's hard to have your data there.
That's a great observation. So, we all read a lot of articles every morning in our various business reading list. Thinking about digital transformation, I think that for the last 10 years, it's mostly I've been reading about infrastructure, cloud first initiatives. How do you migrate your data centers to be more power efficient, decarbonization, things like that? And what you're really saying is the genesis of this conversation for the next decade needs to be more around how do you get your data there and how do you use it? Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, we have to go up the stack. The infrastructure is one thing, and having distributed infrastructure and being able to, through APIs, spin up access to and use of the infrastructure is one thing. But we have to look at data as something that's real. It's a real resource, and it is often the product itself. It's the thing which is being delivered from one company in the supply chain to the next. Uh, in the media and entertainment world, we don't use film anymore. What you're shipping are bits. In many industries, what's being shipped, what is the product is data. In the bioinformatics and life sciences, in the chip design world, these designs, these are all data. And when you look at the supply chain, meaning having companies that do work on behalf of other companies that do work on behalf of others, what's being delivered up and down that chain is becoming more and more data. And the problem is, how is that delivered? The state of the art today, pre-Hammerspace, is that data is delivered by copy. You're literally taking and taking a point in time and copying it, and you send it off, and everybody's handing around copies.
So I'm curious, what would the alternative be?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to imagine the alternative because we're so used to it. By the way, handing around copies wasn't always so easy. We used to have to do it by sneakernet. I was so proud of the fact that Fusion IO was actually used to ship Avatar, the movie. Like, they put the bits on the Fusion IO devices and used those in a briefcase on a plane as a way to ship it. And we still do ship data that way sometimes because it's actually higher bandwidth to carry the media than to send it over networks sometimes. But
now our postal service is not wildly reliable, so we need an alternative.
Well, and even if you copy the data over a wire, over a network, it's still a copy. And see, the thing about copies are they are like amputating a limb from a live tree. As soon as you've made the copy, it's now dead. It's not connected to the source of life. It's not no longer evolving and growing. You've shipped something off to have it grafted into somebody else's systems where they can operate on it, and then they have to hand it back. So in a world where your supply chain of data is via copy, you're literally amputating limbs and shipping them around and grafting them in. You're creating a Frankenstein, with body parts that are stitched together. And it's not part of the same live data environment. So the alternative, which is radically different than what people are even used to imagining, because what we know is this world of copying. It makes sense, right? But in a world where you can actually share access to a live data environment and have that environment rendered within different data centers in different locations equally well, as if you had local performance, because you do have local performance. If you can do that, it becomes a different thing, because now you're actually sharing access to the same live data. So that's really what's radically different, is that the data management, the movement of data, once you put it behind the facade of data and hide it, say behind the file system, then it's hidden, and it no longer fractures your view of what is the data to these units that are copied out and severed and become a fixed point in time, no longer evolving with the data environment.
So it sounds like we ought to, in one of your visits back to this podcast, have a little bit more conversation about how Hammerspace works on creating this global data environment. But, kind of thinking about the other types of guests that you'd like to see on this show as you think about what it really takes to accomplish decentralization, digital transformation. What other types of guests beyond technologists and kind of the IT industry do you expect need to be a part of this conversation?
Clearly the folks who wrestle with these kinds of problems all day and supplying these, so the IT professionals, CIOs, CTOs, but I think this goes well beyond that. This goes to the leadership of a company who are thinking about how to operate with other companies. So how to provide their product and service in a digital world where that's a digital product and service, and how to coordinate that with others. So we're talking here about the folks whose primary task is how to create valuable products and how to deliver those products, especially in a world where markets are mature and layered, and we divvy them up and hand them out to get better efficiency from it. So I think the kinds of guests that are interesting for this podcast are, first, the people who are entrepreneurs and leaders looking for and driving innovative ways to bring value to the digital economy. And then those beneath them who are looking at how to actually deliver on that dream. Um, yeah, so business leaders and technologists. And I think we'll have a good chance to bring on analysts and folks who are thinking about this from a macro perspective as well.
Interesting. So, as we tie things up, I think one question that kind of is lingering in my mind that I want to ask you is, we talked about unchaining data from the data center, making it a decentralized resource. How does data help humanity? What kind of problems in the world is liberating our data going to really help us to solve problems with?
Well, that's a softball kind of question because software is eating the world, isn't it? Mark Andreessen puts it. Um, yeah, data is the new oil. It's funny you use that analogy because even oil fields, the piece of land that is has minerals underneath it to be mined or drilled, even its value is more and more. It's increasingly in the data that has been gathered about it, the seismic data, the information on the what's gone in to produce it. So we're seeing in any of the most um, uh, legacy industries that data is having a massive transformative effect. And we're seeing that accelerate now with machine learning and AI being able to make better utilization of the data. So I don't think there's an industry out there that isn't affected by the opportunity for digital transformation to change the competitive dynamics in a way that you can't ignore, um, regardless of how uh, fundamentally legacy or the industry is. Uh, yeah.
Very far-reaching implications for sure.
Well, that gives us a lot of topics to discuss, a lot of areas to discuss. And that's what can be exciting about this podcast. Hopefully, bring in professionals from a myriad of different, whether it's bio and life sciences or in the maybe oil and gas, like we were just speaking about, or clearly in the world of media, entertainment, software and game design. These should all be really interesting areas to explore how data how data is central to their business and what things could uh, could change the game for them. Make a quantum leap in improvement. I think it's decentralization of data. We're seeing the same thing, by the way, in the world of cryptocurrencies and blockchain. It's another form of decentralization that is very apropos. This ability to create a decentralized trust. You don't need a central trusted agent, right? So view this as part of an even bigger trend, the decentralization of data out of its silos and localization in single data centers or single systems is one thing, but we're seeing that same thing as the world becomes smaller and smaller, need for things to work in a distributed, decentralized fashion.
David, thanks for a great conversation. Thank you for being the first guest on the Data Unchained podcast and for sponsoring making this possible.
Well, I guess I have to sponsor the podcast so that I can get invited. So this is great.
Thanks for listening to Data Unchained, powered by Hammerspace. To learn more, visit hammerspace.com. If you have a guest you would like to hear on the show, email me at molly@hammerspace.com.